Hello, everyone. This is Timothy Archibald. I am the Associate Director of the Photography Department at the Academy of Art. And I wanted to do a series of these kind of little video kind of interviews, I guess, of myself, that addresses books that I love, photography books that I think are fascinating and I want to share with everyone. And, the first one that we're doing in this series is one of my all time favorite books of the past probably of the past 2 years, which is this book, which is Drivers in the 1980s by Chris Dorley-Brown. And I had listened to Chris on a podcast and immediately liked kind of his philosophy about photography and his reasons behind why he makes pictures, where it seems like he does projects that are very anthropological, but the meanings behind them are very personal. And he had a book come out of current work, but this is work that he did when he was a photography student in the 1980s. And to me, it comes off as simple, honest, unpretentious, and just a wonderful kind of time capsule of what the people and the color and everything was like during that era. And so we'll take this book to the table and we will go through it. So this is the book, Drivers in the 1980s by Chris Dorley-Brown. And if you look at the back of it, it kind of gives a quick hit as to what this is about. Chris Dorley-Brown spent 2 summers in the mid-1980s photographing drivers stuck in traffic jams in and around East London. The colors, cars, haircuts, and expressions, often of frustration, capture a unique period of Margaret Thatcher's Britain. And, I've never been to London. I don't know what life is like there, but these photographs just seem very relatable to me. And, even the production of the book I thought was small, just very relatable. It just seemed kind of accessible. But let's kind of just leaf through this. And on the left here is a picture of the author's dad that he snapped, I think, when he was 8. He says, "I grew up around cars. Dad was a car man. He bought them, sold them, mended and polished them, and sold the petrol to make them run. On Saturday nights, he drove a breakdown truck. The police had him on a rota, and when the boozers closed at 11 p.m. sharp, the predictable carnage would begin. He would follow the ambulance and fire crews and pick up the bits of glass, rubber, metal, and sometimes even bits of people. He towed the motors back to the yard where, a few days later, as a schoolboy, I would pry open the deformed doors and sit in the driver's seat and imagine the worst. Broken safety glass under my backside, smears of blood on the vinyl, clock stopped at the moment of impact, an eerie prelude to a novel I was shortly to read, which I imagined had been written especially for me." And after this kind of brief introduction, we get into the photos of Chris's work. And so, there is just a feeling here that this is like a kid who's into photography, taking pictures and not really interacting with anyone, but just kind of experiencing the joy of making these photographs. And, there's an innocence and an excitement to the early days when you're discovering photography. And, I thought that this project seems to have it. And it seems like what Chris is doing is he's simply standing, parking himself like standing at the median in a traffic jam, and everyone's captive, and he's just pointing the camera at them, making pictures. And my bet is that he probably just made one picture of each person. And so here's a photograph that he mentions in this in the introduction, I think. He said, "One of the photographs in particular I liked. It was of a man I imagine was a disenchanted stockbroker, sitting alone on a bus, staring into the void as he absorbed the reality of another bad day at the office. He looked like a man from a bygone era, the bus window grimy with bird shit. Game over. I put the negs from this project away, an unfinished exercise which I would revisit a year later, with another foray into the city during summer for another 5 rolls. Then back into the drawer they went." And this was the picture I imagined he was referring to. Don't know for sure. But It's not my favorite. It's an obvious winner, I think, for any young photographer or mature photographer. But as I go through this book, what I think is that this book isn't about like getting a great shot as much as it seems like to me it's about the accumulation of images and the repetition and the things that kind of come to the surface, the subtle hint of the fashions, the color and what the color looked like, from the 1980s and what it looked like when photographed on medium format film. And sometimes there's eye contact, such as this. A lot of times he's just looking at someone like a street photographer would. And, there's every picture has a reward for me. This guy looks like a character to me, and there's something innocent about that. There's kind of a standoffish moment here, but it still works as a photograph. And then it looks like he's kind of looking at details. And just that idea that the people in the car are captive. And now we're going to kind of look at the pieces. It almost looks like some of it looks kind of satirical from the era or something like that. There's just something about this book that I feel like I could go back to over and over. And I'm going to read a little more from his introduction as we look at a piece here. He says, when I was 8 years old, my dad arrived home one day in the most glamorous Ford I have ever seen, a convertible Cortina, off-white with black canvas roof. We piled in and went for a spin on country roads and at one point stopped to admire the view. I picked up my mom's camera and for the first time in my life, I took a photograph. It was of my dad, still in his work clothes, dark suit and tie, looking out the car window. And the idea that he even had access to this photograph, I thought was amazing, but this is it here. And it just seems like such a premonition to this project that he, would shoot later and then not even celebrate until this book came out in 2014. Just little pieces here, this goofy thing hanging from the rearview mirror and this hint of arm, the reflections that are kind of coming into these things. The rundown car, the angles of the architecture. There just was something beautiful about this. And then just to read a little more from his introduction, he essentially says, these images are from the first 5 rolls of color film I ever shot. Simple portraits, faces, and torsos reframed by the wide screens and doors of the vehicle. They hold a stillness in a world of movement and unpredictability. And he says, here are all the images, more or less. After this day, I never bought another roll of black and white film again. The journey had started. Oh, and the book that I mentioned earlier that I fantasized about when I was in my dad's wrecked cars, that was Crash by J.G. Ballard. And so that's how he ends his essay. And here we have the picture that's on the cover. And it's interesting, the picture on the cover, boy, I love it. I love it on the cover. Love it on the cover. When you see it in the context of the book, it doesn't really do anything special. It's one of many interesting pictures, but it did make a kind of really beautiful, charming cover. And then, I'm always curious on how photographers end books. How do they bring something to a close? And this book just kind of winds down a little bit with a sense of humor, a little more of what we've seen before. And then this is the last photograph. And obviously done on a probably different day and a different project, but it just kind of wrapped the book up in, I don't know, just with a sense of humor and a good kind of acknowledgement of the times. And so that is the book, Drivers in the 1980s by Chris Dorley-Brown. And this was published in 2014 by Hoxton Mini Press. Thanks, guys. We will have another one next week. Bye-bye.